Early on a summer evening, Karasyov was returning home from work. He was whistling an unintelligible tune and horribly out of tune. He passed a long row of commercial stalls, then diagonally crossed a kid's playground overgrown with weeds and entered his building. He was in a great mood. While waiting for the elevator, Karasyov suddenly thought how little a person actually needs for complete happiness. Today was a bright example of that. Nothing extraordinary happened, just a chain of little things. So what? He received a bonus. Not a big deal. During lunch break, he chipped in with the guys and had 100 grams of a drink. Also not a very significant fact. And in a few minutes, Iriska would be waiting for him at the doorstep of their apartment, and Karasyov would find himself in her warm embrace. He entered the elevator and pressed the button into the socket, on which a decade ago one could still see the number 7. At that moment, he realized that his wife probably hadn't made it home yet. Since today Karasyov arrived home an hour earlier than usual, instead of shaking on the tram, he managed to catch a private taxi, a rare phenomenon. Usually, the minibuses are packed during rush hour, but today luck was on his side. There you go, one more reason to be in a good mood. He needed to prepare dinner by the time Iriska arrived. For example, fry some eggs, or make an omelette. Naturally, his wife usually did that. But since today Karasyov beat her to it, why not do something nice for his beloved woman for once? Actually, even after a year and a half of marriage, Karasyov couldn't bring himself to call her a woman. She was still just a girl, 20 years old. Imagine, Iriska could pass for his daughter after all. Karasyov was already 42. If someone had told him before that he would end up with a wife 22 years his junior, he wouldn't have believed it for a second. It wouldn't even seem funny to him, just something foolish. Nothing clever. He had no luck with wives before Iriska. He had plenty of ladies for the bedroom. No problems there. But the marriage bonds always got cracked. His first wife cheated on him left and right, and he couldn't withstand half a year of married life, divorcing that cheap woman. With his second spouse, they also didn't make it to their first anniversary, as she simply left him for someone else. On top of that, she mercilessly mocked his manhood in bed. It's no wonder that he became very fixated on this issue. But, in the end, he managed to find a girl who had no prior experience with men before him, Iriska. Throughout the entire winter and half of the spring, Karasyov went out with her without taking it to the bedroom. It wasn't difficult for him, an experienced Casanova, to make this naive girl fall in love with him. He gave her flowers, took her to the drama theater and Philharmonic, and even when they were alone in his bachelor's lair, everything was limited to a bottle of champagne, 2 or 3 innocent kisses, and long, prolonged conversations. Oh, how difficult it was for him to play the role of a noble knight. How Iriska clung to him, practically dragging him to bed, repeating that she was already an adult. Why did he constantly remind her of the age difference? She looked at Karasyov with adoring eyes and was ready to follow him through fire and water. Such a touchingly naive girl, a lovesick slave girl. That's who he ultimately molded out of Iriska. He was her first man. He became her god and ruler. Iriska happily fulfilled any of his desires. Any whim in bed. Is there a man in the world who doesn't dream of such a life companion? Moreover, the knowledge that his young wife had no one to compare his sexual qualities to elevated Karasyov in his own eyes, instilled self-confidence in him. Only one thought troubled him. Iriska, beautiful, fresh, uninhibited like a magnet, attracted the attention of other men. What if she desires variety and comparisons? What if there's an equally sexually obsessed and persistent peer who awakens her desire for adventure? After all, Karasyov isn't getting any younger, half of his hair is already gray, and Iriska blossoms with each passing day. Thinking about it, he stepped out of the lift and took out the keychain with a bunch of keys. He unlocked both locks. Swinging the door open, he stepped into his apartment and froze in place. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck him and welded him to the floor, because in the hallway, right under the coat rack, there was a large sports bag, and a pair of men's shoes were peeking out from under it, while sounds were coming from the bedroom. Sounds that were unmistakable. Yes, This is exactly what Karasyov feared. Betrayal. A sneak attack. The collapse of all his hopes for a peaceful family happiness. He was even afraid to admit to himself how much he was afraid. Exactly that. The sounds emanating from the bedroom were quite explicit, muted female sobs, moans, and screams. The intermittent roar of a man the way many sound when approaching the climax of pleasure. Accompanying this never-ending passionate duet was the creak of the springs on the double bed. Up and down, faster and faster, faster and faster. One had to completely lose imagination not to be able to imagine what was happening in that bedroom. So, that's how it turns out. As soon as he came home from work an hour early, an uninvited member immediately appeared. A voluntary helper for an aging married man, clearly young, you could even tell by the voice. So much for his beloved wife, little mouse Iriska. Just another empty shell, like all the other women. You can't trust anyone, because they are all scoundrels. Or maybe Iriska pretended that everything was fine with Karasyov? Maybe he didn't satisfy her? That's what Karasyov was afraid of. To one day come across the gaze of his young wife, comparing and impartially evaluating, and see in her eyes a smirk of superiority and secret knowledge, the kind Eve probably had after tasting the forbidden fruit. He reached the bedroom door, and then he quietly opened the door. His eyes fell upon a wide double bed, with half of the sheets slipped down to the floor, the familiar bed on which he and Iriska had done all sorts of things for the past year and a half, and now, bouncing up and down on it, was the glistening, sweaty rear end of another man, a young, energetic, full of life man. He let out a furious scream, convulsively jerking in orgasm. After a few seconds, he collapsed face down, and turned onto his side. Karasyov saw the face of the audacious intruder. Indeed, he couldn't have been more than 20. The young man also realized they weren't alone in the bedroom. He immediately jumped up. Stunned, he blushed instantly and reached for his jeans, which were thrown on the back of a chair. The girl also raised her head, and Karasyov's blood rushed to his head like a wave of heat. It wasn't Iriska. It was a completely unfamiliar girl. Everything else became a jumble in his mind, and it's no wonder anyone would be bewildered in such a situation. The embarrassed girl asked him to look away while she dressed, so, facing the wall, he listened to the explanations of the young guest. It turned out that these people were acquaintances of his Iriska. She, being accommodating as always, arranged for her friends, who had no place of their own to indulge their passion, to have the keys to the apartment for a day. What a nightmare! How inconvenient! But, by God, they thought Ira had informed her husband. Then, buttoning up on the go and apologizing profusely, they made their way to the hallway, hurriedly putting on their shoes. The young man grumbled irritably at his girlfriend. I told you, we shouldn't have done this in someone else's apartment. Damn it. I hope I never have to go anywhere with you again. Still red as a lobster, he slung his sports bag over his shoulder and walked out the door. The girl didn't hesitate to follow him. And Karasyov headed to the kitchen. He took out a bottle of Crystal vodka from the fridge. Grabbing a glass, he filled it 2/3 full and downed the cold vodka in one gulp. Then he took out a 3-liter jar of lightly salted cucumbers. Nervously pacing the kitchen, he chewed on a cucumber and contemplated the audacity of Iriska letting strangers into their apartment, even if they were her friends. So what? At least, for the sake of propriety, she should have consulted with her husband, and he frankly didn't like this kind of friendship at all. Okay, maybe the guy. It's a simple male matter when a woman agrees. You take advantage of the moment. But concerning his girlfriend, a big question arises. Would a decent girl go to someone else's apartment for such an activity? No, it is unlikely that such a girl can be considered decent. Let Iriska come back from work and let her answer the question, where did she get such a promiscuous friend? And why has Karasyov never heard anything about this friend from his wife before? He poured himself half a glass again. And, holding it in his hand, he stared thoughtfully at the vodka. More and more unsettling thoughts came to his mind. Karasyov tried to push them away, but it was not very successful. He thought that Iriska seemed to be corrupting. After all, it is said, "Tell me who your friend is, and I will tell you who you are." Therefore, if his wife is hanging out with a girl like this guest from the bedroom, maybe they are not very far apart? Maybe his Iriska is currently alone somewhere in a secret apartment with someone else's keys and not alone? And Karasyov, exhaling loudly, resolutely put the glass to his lips. Meanwhile, his recent guests approached the bus stop. The guy, taking a heavy sports bag off his shoulder, carefully placed it on the asphalt. Besides gold and money, it also had a tape recorder and a video player. Remembering this, he said to his companion, "You know, Anka, I'm surprised how this fool didn't notice that his equipment was missing from the room." "Well, maybe the picture in the bedroom seemed more interesting to him," the girl giggled. "You're clever," he embraced her by the shoulders, pulling her closer. "But I don't understand, how did you find out his wife's name?" "Well, when I was looking for money in the dresser, I found their passports." "Well, I looked and naturally remembered." "That's good. Otherwise, I would have had to knock him out to keep him from making noise. Although, you know, if it wasn't for your desire to lie in bed in every apartment we rob, we might have had time to leave before he arrived today. But wasn't it enjoyable for you?" The girl gave her partner a mischievous look. "No, everything was great, I even had time twice." "And you?" "Me too. But if he had come a little earlier, then it would have been bad." And they laughed.